Tonight, as you know, is Wednesday, and so we have a guest. And today we have a Benedictine abbot. We're going right up there to the top. This is Abbot Clement Zeleznik, who's from Cleveland, and we didn't mess around with one of the other guys, right to the top. And he's the Abbot of St. Andrew Abbey in Cleveland, Ohio. He's come here to tell us about a woman of this century. She's born in the 1800s, but she died in 1937. Her name was Concepcion Cabrera, and she de Armida. She's from Mexico, and for 40 years she had a spiritual diary in obedience to her spiritual directors. She wrote about the various paths to holiness and mysteries of the church. But one of the things that's really interesting for us today is she was not a religious. She was a wife and the mother of 9. Reminds me of the call we had last night of the woman asking, how do you pray when you've got kids around? Well, this lady had 9 kids and became very, very mystical. So I'd like to welcome Abbot Clement. Welcome to our show. Good to have you here tonight.
Very glad to be here.
Great, great. So, Abbot, tell us about this Concepcion. The nickname is Conchita.
Conchita.
Yeah.
It's a short form, or little Concepcion.
Mm-hmm.
The amazing thing in her life, I think, in terms of being a mother, is that she was faithful to her prayer life. But the history of her own upbringing, her family was a very good Catholic family. The father gathered the family to pray every day.
Mm-hmm.
And the influences of her life were first those things, and also I think she had a great thirst for the Eucharist, so that when she received the Eucharist for the first time at 10 years old, she was really ready.
Well, they were all in religious life already. You know, when I met him, Regina Marie was a postulant, I think. I don't think she had completed her vows yet. And of course, when we did go to visit, it was at the school. And as the kids came along, my children were never in awe of them for being in the religious, because it was Uncle Clement. It was Aunt Reggie. It was, Auntie Jonathan. It was just part of the family. In fact, my daughter-in-law, when she read Clement's obituary, was amazed. She had no idea that he had done so much.
He's quite a guy, He's always very active and very, very lively. He had a lot of life, it seemed, and he did a lot of reading too. He was always up on everything. But some of the things I didn't realize, until later on, was that how much he did, in activities. We had a couple of tennis courts in our backyard here at that time, and he'd be out there playing tennis. He'd be playing tennis with us.
We had a pretty good tennis team, and interesting that on the Abbey grounds there was a clay court. When Father Clement was the coach, I forget if it was for 2 years or 3 years. He didn't teach so much the fundamentals, but he taught confidence, camaraderie. Strangely enough, I learned faith as much from him being the coach. And if I might give an anecdote, so we had a tennis match at Akron North High School, and Father Clement was going to drive the players in the Abbey's old checker cab. This old checker cab, which was probably lots of the front end parts were broken. He was driving it. It was pulling over so hard to the right side that the whole way he had his hands on the wheel, pulling it with full strength to the left to stay straight. But the interesting thing was when we arrived in Akron, and it was like, well, okay, where is it? And it was like, well, Akron south of Cleveland. We got on 77 South, and I knew we'd get to Akron, and God would direct us the rest of the way. And I don't remember how we even got there, but we got there on time, and somehow he had no idea the street or the address, but he had faith that we would get there, and we did. Had a very good match.
We did go with him one time to Pontiac, Michigan. They had uncle and aunt there. And Clement was driving, and we were singing at the top of our lungs, "Rock of My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham." And he almost missed the exit. at the last second. I'm going to say past the last second, but he just and got off. And I was a little shaken, and he started laughing, and he said, well, we almost rocked our souls to the bosom of Abraham. Okay.
But I think what impressed me most was his attitude at prayer, and as he was saying Mass, because he was always very attentive to what he was doing and very attentive to the Lord in his ministry. And I guess that's why one of the reasons he turned out to be such a good spiritual director to so many people.
I was teaching in North Ridgeville at the time. At that time the community was having a series of renewals. And so I signed up for this renewal. I didn't know Abbot Clement I'd never heard of him. I mean, his sisters are in my community, but I didn't know they had a brother. I was out at the renewal, and it was a kind of casual kind, where we had back and forth, which often renewals at that time are just preached, but it was question and answer. And so I asked a lot of questions, but I'm a sneaky kind of person. I'm asking a question usually that people can't answer. And Abbot Clement answered him dead on. He saw right through me. He knew what I was asking. And I thought, well, this guy's pretty good. I mean, he was brilliant. There was no doubt about that. And I don't mean just in terms of knowledge and education. He knew how to read people. I thought I was pretty well shielded from any of that. And boy, he saw right through me. And he didn't give me an easy way out. See, I wanted an easy answer no. The only way was that I had to go through it. I had to suffer. Who wants to do that? But it made a difference in my life.
So I was lucky to have Abbot Clement as teacher for a class 3 out of my 4 years. I think the freshman year was religion, and one of the years in between was geometry, and then senior year was the upper level physics. And that was very fortunate because he was felt at the time by most of the students as the best teacher we had, honestly.
So for 4 years, I was the assistant principal, and I would have periodic opportunities to visit Clement in his classroom and where he was teaching, and see the wonderful relationship he had with the students. He was always trying to bring the best out of them. He's always trying to help them understand more than the book gave. And in other words, the book could say so much, but Clement could always add so much more. And so many times he made the relationship of physics with the power of God.
So after high school, I decided to go into science, first of all, and I thought about chemical engineering. But then I realized that I love physics in part because Abbot Clement was such a good teacher and inspired me so much, and realized that it was difficult, and I liked the idea of the challenge. I decided in the summer before I started college to be a physics major, and I wasn't disappointed. It was extremely interesting, with the only problem being, well, what do you do with it after you get the degree in physics? As a physics graduate, medical school was, I hadn't thought of it until about the middle of college, but it was actually kind of natural. A lot of this reflected on not just Father Clement getting me interested in science and in physics, but also in him obviously caring about making the world a better place and thinking, well, what can I do? What could be better than becoming a physician and taking care of people who have problems? What a way to make the world better than it is on an everyday basis.
And I don't remember exactly when Father Clement went away to study his spiritual theology, to personal direction and so on, but he was gone for 3 years. When he came back, the only difference I noticed in him was he was better. He was more open. He was more enthusiastic about life, more enthusiastic about monasticism, more enthusiastic about theology, and he was really a wonderful man to be near.
He was quiet around the family. He laughed, he'd enjoy what was going on. It was kind of, he'd kind of stand back and watch. And that might have been a family trait too, because Don did that a lot. One Christmas, Don and I got into it. We had an unpleasant Christmas. And he kind of got us each to vent our feelings. And Don had bought me a matching toaster, blender, and hand mixer. I was not happy with that. I said, these are things for the house. And he said, but you're the heart and soul of the house. And that was how he saw it. I saw it as work items. So Clement kind of worked us through that one. And it was at our house. He was there. And, he saw we were not having a great time.
Well, there was nothing fake about him. He didn't need to put on airs. He just was Clement.
What about in earlier stages? A lot of times in the spiritual life, people don't feel anything when they get started praying. Is that the same thing as the dark night of the soul?
It's called laziness. I don't feel like praying, so I don't pray.
Yeah. Or I don't feel anything, so it's not worth my time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the mother's piece of wisdom that she gave us reminded us of that it's precisely when I decide to take Jesus seriously, that's when I begin to pray, and that's the beginning of my direction in life. And I must allow that to flourish and blossom, and I will discover the strength that comes from the prayer life. And you'll be surprised, maybe at first you don't recognize, but there are a lot of things that shows that if you're praying faithfully, it's bearing fruit. Some of them are the strangest things. One is you begin to see where your sins are. Now you may not think that that's a great grace, but it is. You cannot see that without grace. And so the fact that you took the effort to pray faithfully for a while and all you see is your sins is really a sign that you're growing. Yeah. But maybe you don't like that kind of insight.
He was just always Clement. Of course, when he became abbot, he had many responsibilities. It wasn't like he was all puffed up with pride or anything. I think he was very humbled by the distinction. But already then, his health had been failing, and so when he stepped down from that, it didn't surprise me.
I was abbot for 20 years. We went through a lot of development because we built a new monastery, and so we had capital campaign 1, and we had capital campaign, the second capital campaign. And I was gone an awful lot of time because also our Bishop Pill asked me if I would help with confirmations. So I was still doing a lot of confirmations, a lot of evenings, and so I was gone quite a bit. I don't know if this is a factor. It's just my opinion, but I figured that I thought that the monks wanted to get an abbot that would spend more time at home with them, okay? And so I knew that Clement would be the man, and so I wasn't surprised when he was elected. He was here for them. With his conferences, he'd have a lot of conferences for them, He'd be like a spiritual director. He'd be giving them help, spiritually. Being an abbot and the responsibilities wears you out too. So as he was getting older, he was in his 70s when he was elected, so it was one of those things where he slowed down pretty quickly. That's when he went out to the retreat house. He went out to Loyola Retreat House because the Benedictine monks had taken over sponsorship of that retreat house because the Jesuits had to pull out, and they just kept the Jesuit retreat house in Parma, but they had to leave that one go. And so Bishop Lennon told us told the monks that if you could sponsor this thing, we can keep it Catholic. Clement went out there, and there was a live-in chaplain. Live-in chaplain. Okay, now Clement being Clement, on the emails all the time I'd see spiritual day of direct spiritual talk. He'd be giving these talks every season, Advent, Christmas, Lent. He'd have special classes and special programs for the deacons, for the priests, for the laity out at the Loyola Retreat House. But his avocation wasn't golf anymore, and it wasn't tennis. Now it was gardening. He built a garden right next to the retreat house. Okay, he watered it. He had wonderful products, And every week when he came home to the Abbey to pick up his medicine or whatever he needed from the Abbey, he would always bring in a big basket of vegetables. Fresh tomatoes, fresh beans, even corn. You know, he had all this stuff in that little garden, but he loved gardening.
You spent a number of years as a classroom teacher, physics teacher, I believe you said. How is that different from what you're doing now? Not that you compare, but what do you find most fulfilling now?
Well, I was novice master for 20 years, so even though I was teaching in the high school, I would say that was the focus of my life, but physics was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it tremendously. I was well trained. In fact, one day I came to class and on my desk was a statue of Muhammad Ali with his finger up, and there was a note on it that said, "I'm the greatest." I was known as Mr. Physics. And I thought, I laughed to myself, it's time to bring God into my physics lab. But the training that I have for formation is so rich and deep that it just carries me right into, I'm at the right place at the right time doing the right things.
He still talked to people and always was trying to help and uplift. And that's another thing that I've learned from him. It's so important to uplift others. If you want to be in the spiritual life, you know, everything isn't sad and, you know, you got to uplift people and teach them how to uplift themselves through prayer. And it's all about the relationship with Jesus. So, you know, I have years of, you know, reflections that I can go back and think of because of him.